I arrived in Blackwood Ridge, seeking a quiet escape from my past, but the mountain had other plans for my future. The bus lurched to a halt, sighing out a cloud of exhaust before its doors hissed open. I stepped onto the cracked pavement of what passed for Main Street, my travel bag slung heavy over one shoulder, the cold, smooth metal of Uncle Thomas's keys already warming in my clenched palm. Blackwood Ridge was a claustrophobic huddle of weathered buildings, nestled so deep between ancient, brooding peaks that they seemed to lean in, threatening to swallow the last vestiges of daylight. Only one other passenger disembarked with me, an elderly woman, her face a mask of weary resignation, who scurried away into the gathering gloom without a backward glance, as if fleeing an unseen menace. The bus rumbled off, its taillights shrinking to pinpricks before vanishing around a bend, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. A thin, biting wind, carrying the sharp scent of pine and damp earth, whispered down from the peaks, raising goosebumps on my arms. 3 buildings down, a faded sign declared at the sheriff's office. My first unavoidable stop inside. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of old paper and something metallic, like stale coffee. A large man with a thick neck and eyes the color of river stones sat behind a counter, hunched over a crossword puzzle. He didn't look up immediately, his pen scratching rhythmically. "Can I help you?" he grunted, his voice as flat and uninviting as the chipped linoleum floor. "Ryan Mitchell," I said, my voice feeling oddly thin in the quiet office. "I'm here about my uncle, Thomas Mitchell." The pen froze. His head lifted slowly, his eyes, previously dull, sharpening to a surprising intensity. They raked over me, assessing, weighing, then narrowed with a flicker of something I couldn't quite place: suspicion. Disdain, resignation. "Mitchell," he repeated, not a question, more like a statement of unwelcome fact. "Thomas's nephew." I nodded, a dull ache starting behind my eyes. This was the moment. 3 weeks ago, the phone call had been brutally brief, devoid of details, just the cold, clinical news that Thomas had died in an accident on the mountain. Now, here I was, chasing ghosts and fragments of a life I barely knew. The sergeant pushed himself away from the desk with a grunt, his chair groaning in protest. He disappeared into a back room, the swing door creaking shut behind him. I stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of shuffling, the rustle of paper. My heart hammered an erratic rhythm against my ribs. 6 months sober, and every fresh stress felt like a tightening band around my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get back on the next bus and leave Blackwood Ridge to its secrets. But the memory of my uncle's face, blurred by time and distance, held me rooted. He reappeared a moment later, carrying a plain cardboard box. He slid it across the worn counter, not quite meeting my eyes. "Everything we collected from the scene," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The reports on top, all official." I glanced at the thin folder, then back at him. "What exactly happened?" I asked, pushing for more, for something concrete. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his grizzled cheek. "It's all in the report, Mitchell. Fell during his night shift. Bad head wound. Probably died right away." His gaze flickered to the folder, then away, scanning the peeling paint on the far wall. The refusal to meet my eyes, the quick, clipped words, the complete lack of empathy. It all screamed that there was more. A story he wasn't sharing, a truth too inconvenient for official records. This town, even the law, felt like a tightly sealed jar, holding something festering within. I signed where he pointed, my signature feeling alien and shaky, then gathered the box. It wasn't heavy. A worn leather journal, its pages thick with forgotten thoughts. A wallet containing $43, a meager sum for a life. A ring of keys, one larger than the rest, clearly marked Lodge. And his watch, its hands frozen at 3:15, the crystal spiderwebbed with impact marks. The sum of a life, the weight of it pressed down on me, the finality of it. This was all that remained. As I turned to leave, the sergeant finally spoke, his voice low, a gravelly rumble. "Town's not used to outsiders, Mitchell, even family. Folks here keep to themselves." It was less a warning and more a statement of fact, a boundary line drawn in the dust. I nodded, acknowledging it, feeling the full, isolating weight of his words. Outside, the late afternoon air had grown sharper, colder. People moved along the sidewalks, their figures silhouetted against the deepening twilight, but none met my gaze. Not directly. They'd glance, a quick, darting assessment, then snap their eyes away, as if caught in a forbidden act. It was the kind of attention that made your skin crawl, the feeling of being watched without ever truly being seen. I needed supplies before heading to the cabin. Food, water, the basics. The general store was at the end of the block, its single, flickering fluorescent light casting a sickly yellow glow onto the pavement. A bell jingled overhead when I pushed open the door, its sound thin and mournful in the sudden silence that fell inside. 4 people stood near the counter, their hushed conversation abruptly cut off. All 4 turned, their gazes locking onto me, an unnerving collective stare. The man behind the register, a grizzled behemoth with thick, calloused hands and a salt and pepper beard, finally broke the silence. "Help you?" His voice was gruff, impatient. "Just picking up some basics," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, moving toward the grocery aisle. The whispers started before I was halfway there. A low, sibilant hum that seemed to cling to the dusty shelves. "Mitchell's nephew, just like him, here to stick his nose where it don't belong." Another voice, rougher, lower, added, "Better hope he's smarter than his uncle was." The words were like stones, aimed and thrown, designed to bruise. They didn't know me, didn't know Thomas, but they judged just the same. A familiar ache, old and deep, stirred in my gut. I'd spent too much of my life being judged, running from the ghosts of my own bad decisions. This place felt like a fresh hell. I grabbed what I needed quickly, trying to ignore the prickle of eyes on my back. Bread, eggs, coffee, a couple of canned soups, the bland, safe provisions of a solitary life. When I brought them to the counter, the man rang me up without a word, his movements precise and unhurried. The others in the store had dispersed, suddenly engrossed in products they'd clearly ignored moments before, their backs turned to me, but I could feel their presence, a collective weight of scrutiny. "Ryan Mitchell," I said, pushing my cash across the counter, forcing myself to meet his stony gaze. Thomas was my uncle. He counted my change with meticulous care, his fingers thick and deliberate. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until he finally spoke, pushing my small bag forward. "Sam Guthrie," he paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Sorry about your uncle." I waited, hoping for a sliver of warmth, a crumb of information, but that was it. "Any chance you knew him well?" I tried again, pressing. Sam shook his head, his gaze already drifting to the next customer. "Not really. Came in for supplies now and then, kept to himself." He pushed my change toward me. "Cabin's up on Mill Creek Road. Last one before the forest starts proper." The hint was unmistakable. Leave, now. I gathered my bag, the weight of their unspoken hostility pressing on my back as I walked out, the bell jingling a final, unwelcoming note. The cabin wasn't hard to find. A narrow, rutted dirt driveway, choked with weeds, led to a small, unassuming house. It sat hunched against the gathering dusk, desperate for a fresh coat of paint. Pine trees grew too close on 3 sides, their branches, skeletal fingers, scraping against the roof whenever the wind stirred. Inside, it smelled of dust and damp wood, a heavy, musky emptiness that seemed to settle in my lungs. One main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a bedroom and a small bathroom tucked away on the side. I dropped my bag with a dull thud and looked around. Thomas hadn't been one for decor. A threadbare couch faced a small, ancient TV. The kitchen table held a stack of unopened mail and a single, empty coffee mug. The cabinets, when I checked them, contained the bare basics, a few chipped plates, a couple of mismatched cups, some canned goods, but it was what I found behind those basics that told the real story, a story I knew intimately. An empty whiskey bottle, tucked carefully behind the bread box. Another, slender and green, hidden beneath the bathroom sink. 3 more, all drained, shoved deep into the back of the bedroom closet, beneath a pile of faded flannel shirts. My throat tightened. I knew the drill. I'd lived it. Hiding bottles from roommates, from girlfriends, from myself. 6 months clean, and the sight of those amber husks still made my stomach clench, a phantom craving stirring in the shadows of my mind. Thomas had been running too, it seemed. Running from something, or just running from himself. On the kitchen table, beneath the stack of junk mail, I found an envelope addressed to me. My name, in elegant, looping script, seemed out of place in this dreary cabin. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy stock, bearing the imposing letterhead of Raven's Peak Mountain Lodge. In the event of Thomas Mitchell's death or inability to perform his duties, it read, the formal language jarring against the raw reality of my uncle's demise, the position of night watchman is offered to his next of kin, Ryan Mitchell. They'd known. Expected it, that cold, calculated assumption that I, the last remaining Mitchell, would simply step into the void my uncle had left. The letter listed the pay decent enough, a lifeline in my current circumstances, and the basic duties. Patrol the lodge from midnight to 8 o'clock, log any disturbances, maintain security protocols. At the bottom, a handwritten note, scrawled in a bolder, more impatient hand. The job is yours if you want it. Call the number, George Campbell, manager. I folded the letter carefully, slipping it into my jacket pocket. The cabin, already small, seemed to shrink further, its walls pressing in. Night was bleeding through the windows, painting the world in shades of bruised purple and charcoal gray. I unpacked my meager belongings, made a simple dinner of canned soup, forcing it down, then tried to settle in. Thomas's leather journal, retrieved from the sheriff's box, lay on the table, a silent, accusing presence. I wasn't ready to read it yet. Too raw. Too real. Sleep came hard in the unfamiliar bed, the silence of the mountain pressing in, heavy and profound. I dozed off sometime after midnight, only to be jerked violently awake by a sound. A soft, rhythmic scratching at my window. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I lay utterly still, straining my ears in the suffocating darkness. It could have been branches, of course. The pine trees were close. But there was a deliberate quality to it, a pattern, 3 distinct scratches, a pause, 3 more, a pause. My heart thudded against my ribs. I got up, moving slowly, unwillingly, toward the window. A part of me screamed not to look, to pull the covers over my head and pray it would go away. The glass, a dark mirror, showed only my own reflection, pale and distorted against the impenetrable blackness outside. I pressed my face closer, cupping my hands around my eyes, trying to peer into the abyss. Nothing. Only the vague, swaying shapes of trees, indistinguishable from the shadows. The scratching had stopped, but as I stood there, staring out, something shifted in the forest. The dark spaces between the trees seemed to deepen, to gather, like pools of liquid night. And then, subtly, unnervingly, they seemed to move. Not the rustle of leaves, not the swaying of branches in the wind. A weird, almost fluid motion, like something was shifting, breathing just beyond the veil of perception. Looking at me. Watching, my breath hitched. I stepped back, my hands shaking as I drew the curtains closed, shutting out the terrifying, ambiguous darkness. Sleep didn't come again that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the lodge key from Thomas's ring turning over and over in my fingers, its cold weight a stark contrast to the burning confusion in my mind. The job offer so immediate, so ready, it felt too convenient, too preordained. Like they'd been waiting for me. But I needed money. My paltry savings wouldn't last, and going back wasn't an option. Not yet. Not until I figured out what had truly happened to Thomas, what he'd stumbled into. Come morning, I'd call the number. I'd take the job. I'd get a foothold in this strange, closed town. It was a fresh start, I told myself, a chance to rebuild. And after 6 months of clawing my way toward sobriety, I knew how to recognize one when I saw it. Even if this one came with the promise of weird scratching sounds and shadows that moved with unnerving purpose in the dead of night. The next morning, the lodge seemed to loom even larger than I'd imagined. A great timber edifice nestled halfway up the mountain. Its rough-hewn logs blended seamlessly with the ancient pines, as if it had grown from the very rock itself. Stone chimneys, like ancient sentinels, pierced the slate-gray sky. The parking lot held only 2 cars, casting long, lonely shadows. The front doors, heavy and made of dark oak, swung open into a grand lobby. My boots echoed on the polished stone floor, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. The ceiling soared far above, crisscrossed with massive wooden beams. A monumental stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. Trophy heads, their glass eyes eerily lifelike, stared down from every surfaced deer, elk, and one enormous bear, its maw perpetually snarling, its eyes seeming to track my every move as I crossed the room. George Campbell stood behind the reception desk, a gaunt figure whose height seemed to stretch him thin and brittle. Deep lines, etched around his mouth, made him look perpetually sour, as if he carried the weight of the mountain's secrets on his shoulders. "Mitchell," he said, his voice flat, his gaze sweeping over me with the same unnerving assessment I'd grown accustomed to. He didn't offer his hand. "Follow me." He led me through a small archway behind the reception desk into a cramped office. A bank of security monitors glowed with the cold light of surveillance, displaying empty hallways, the dark parking lot, and the indistinct, swaying tree line beyond. "This is your base," George stated, his voice clipped. "You'll make rounds every hour on the hour, check all doors and windows, make sure everything's locked, log anything you see in here." He tapped a thick, leather-bound binder on the desk, its pages already filled with terse, numbered entries. "What am I looking for exactly?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. The question hung in the air between us, met by a glacial silence. George's jaw tightened. Nothing, Mitchell. You're not looking for anything. You're making sure the lodge is secure. That's it. He handed me a heavy ring of keys and a robust flashlight, its beam a stark, white cylinder in the dim room. Then, without another word, he led me on a hurried tour of the building. The main floor housed the lobby, a cavernous restaurant, a dimly lit bar, and a few imposing meeting rooms, their chairs neatly stacked. The second and third floors held guest rooms, row after row of identical empty doors. Off-season, George explained when I inquired. We'll have guests starting next month. His voice was devoid of inflection, as if he were reciting a pre-recorded message. Last was the basement. Concrete floors, cold and unyielding beneath my boots, stretched into a labyrinth of storage rooms, laundry facilities, and the low hum of a boiler room. The air grew heavier here, colder, carrying a faint, musty scent. At the very end of a long, dimly lit hallway stood a heavy metal door, rusted with age, secured by 3 separate heavy-duty locks. Padlocks bolted and a large, intricate deadbolt. "This stays locked," George said, his voice dropping, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Always no exceptions. What's back there?" I asked, my gaze drawn to the rusted metal, an inexplicable sense of dread unfurling in my chest. "Storage," he answered, the word a stone wall. The subject was closed. He turned his back to the door, effectively blocking my view. "Just make your rounds every hour and log anything unusual." "What qualifies as unusual?" I pressed, a flicker of my uncle's stubborn curiosity igniting within me. George's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Nothing is unusual here, Mitchell. No matter what you see or hear, it's just the mountains settling or animals in the woods. Don't investigate, don't leave the marked paths." He pointed to a faded map, tacked to a support pillar, depicting the lodge grounds. Red lines, stark and unforgiving, traced paths between buildings and around the property. "Stay on these," he stressed, his gaze pinning me, especially at night. We returned to the security office. George checked his watch, his movements precise. "It's 8:15. Your shift runs until 8 tomorrow morning." Questions? I had dozens, a torrent of them. About the locked door, about Thomas's accident, about the town's hostility, about the strange atmosphere of this place. But George's unyielding face, the rigid set of his jaw, told me none would be answered. "No," I said, the single word feeling heavy and inadequate. "Good. Phone's there if you need me. I live 10 minutes away." He headed for the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. His voice, when he spoke again, was lower, almost a whisper, laced with an unnerving resonance. "Your uncle was a good man, reliable until he wasn't." Before I could ask what he meant, what could turn a man unreliable, George was gone, the security door clicking softly shut behind him. I settled into the chair, the glow of the security monitors painting the small office in a sickly green light. The lodge creaked around me, a living, breathing entity settling into the chill of the mountain night. At 9 o'clock, I made my first round. Everything was locked and quiet, the empty guest rooms like silent tombs. The hours crawled by, marked only by the hum of the old building and the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the polished floors. I checked the basement twice, my flashlight beam lingering on the heavy metal door. All 3 locks remained secure. Whatever was behind it for now would stay there. By midnight, an unnatural silence had fallen outside. Not the usual quiet of a rural night, filled with the chirps of crickets, the hoot of owls, the rustle of leaves. This was a deliberate silence, profound and unsettling, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Even though I could see the branches of the pines swaying gently in the breeze on the monitors, no sound accompanied their movement. The quiet felt watchful. Predatory. At 1 o'clock a.m., I heard the first odd sound. A low, guttural rumbling, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It vibrated in the very air, a deep thrumming that resonated in my chest. I checked the monitors again, my eyes scanning every screen. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. My 2 o'clock am round took me outside, following the marked path around the lodge's perimeter. The silence out here was even worse, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to muffle my own breathing. No night birds sang, no insects buzzed, not even the faint rustle of small animals moving through the undergrowth. Just dead air and the crunch of gravel under my boots. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, its powerful beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved, but the darkness between the trees seemed deeper than it should be, more solid, almost like a physical presence. It was as if the forest was not just dark, but full of something waiting back inside. I logged what I'd seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen. 2:15 a.m. complete absence of wildlife sounds, unusual silence. I hesitated over the word unusual. George's warning echoed in my mind. Nothing is unusual here, but my instincts screamed otherwise. At 3:17 a.m. it happened. A high-pitched scream, raw and desperate, tore through the night from somewhere deep in the forest. It wasn't an animal sound, too human, too filled with anguish. It rose in pitch, a shriek of pure terror, until it seemed to tear apart the very fabric of the night, then broke abruptly, plunging the world back into a ringing silence. My hand shot to the phone on the security desk, dialing George's number without a moment's hesitation. He answered on the first ring, his voice rough but instantly alert, as if he'd been sitting with the phone in his hand, waiting. "Campbell, George, it's Ryan." I heard a scream in the woods. Sounded like someone in trouble. My voice was tight, urgent. "I told you, ignore it," George snapped, his voice hard, unyielding. "That's just how things are here. But if someone's hurt, George, if someone's out there, no one's hurt. No one's out there. Stay inside. Stay on the paths to your job." He hung up, the line going dead with a click that sounded like a slammed door. I sat back, my chest heaving, my heart hammering. The scream had been real, I knew it. But George's quick, almost dismissive answer, his complete lack of surprise, he'd heard it before. He'd expected it. A chilling realization. At 4:00 a.m. during my rounds, I heard it again. Footsteps on the roof. Heavy, clear steps that moved with deliberate purpose, crossing from one end of the lodge to the other. Not a branch, not the wind. Too heavy, too distinct. I checked the security monitors, flicking to the roof camera. Nothing. Just empty shingles in the dark, starless sky. The camera showed nothing, but my ears told me otherwise. By 5:00 a.m., exhaustion was a physical weight on my shoulders. I'd been up most of the previous night, and the cumulative stress of the past few days, the strange town, my uncle's death, George's cryptic warnings, had worn me down. I made a mug of stale coffee in the small break room, the bitter taste doing little to clear the fog in my mind, and returned to the monitors. That's when I saw them. Shadows moving at the tree line. Too big to be human, too purposeful to be mere tricks of the light. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes rising to stand on 2, their forms shifting and indistinct. The camera's infrared couldn't quite resolve them, just vague, moving shapes that disappeared the moment I tried to focus directly on them, as if they knew they were being watched. I found myself gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles white. The cold I'd felt in the cabin, the shifting shadows, the unnerving quiet, it wasn't just my imagination. It was real. I forced myself to write it all down, every sound, every shadow, every moment of weird quiet. My hand shook, the pen scratching furiously across the page of the logbook. 4:00 a.m. heard heavy footsteps on roof, no visual on camera. 5:00 a.m. large, indistinct shadows observed moving at treeline. Unclear forms. Dawn came slowly, a glacial bleed of color across the sky, from black to deep indigo, then to a pale, hopeful gray. As the first sunlight, weak and hesitant, touched the topmost branches of the trees, I heard a sound. A collective, deep sigh, like a vast, ancient entity exhaling. Then, like someone had flipped a switch, the world came alive. Birds began to sing, their chirps sudden and raucous. Squirrels chattered, rustling through fallen leaves. The normal morning sounds filled the air. As if the terrifying silence of the night had never been. George showed up at 7:55, looking exactly as he had the night before. No messy hair, no sleepy eyes, no hint of a disturbed night. He walked straight to the logbook, his face impassive as he scanned my frantic entries. His eyes, unblinking, read each line. His jaw tightened, a muscle throbbing in his cheek. "You wrote too much," he said, his voice low, his eyes still fixed on the page. He closed the book with a soft thud. "Just note the times of your rounds and any maintenance issues." "Nothing else." I heard a scream, "George," I said, my voice rising, pushing past the weariness. "I saw things moving in the woods." "No, you didn't." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a cold, hard denial. "You heard the wind. You saw shadows from clouds passing over the moon. That's all." "There weren't any clouds last night," I countered, my frustration boiling over. George stared at me, his eyes hard and unyielding. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken meaning. "This job isn't for everyone, Mitchell. Your uncle understood that eventually. You need to decide if you can handle it." "What happened to him?" I pressed, desperation clawing at my throat. "Really?" He fell, hit his head. End of story. George picked up his keys, their jingle loud in the quiet office. "Will you be back tonight?" I thought about the shifting shadows, the desperate scream, the heavy footsteps on the roof. I thought about Thomas's hidden bottles, his cryptic notes, about the heavy metal door in the basement with its 3 formidable locks. A part of me, the part that wanted to run, screamed to say no. But another part, the one that had always been drawn to mysteries, to the edge of the unknown, refused to yield. "Yeah," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "I'll be back." George nodded once, a terse dismissal. 8 o'clock. "Don't be late." I walked back to the cabin in the morning light, too tired to drive. The forest, now bathed in the warm, golden glow of the rising sun, looked innocent, just regular trees and bushes, nothing scary about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, just beyond the tree line, watching me. Something that had screamed in the night, something that had walked on the roof, something that knew I was here, pushing through the library's heavy oak doors, their hinges groaning like forgotten creatures. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The place was empty, save for a gray-haired woman behind the front desk. Her spectacles perched low on her nose, she stamped books with a rhythmic, almost meditative speed. "Help you?" she asked, her voice dry without looking up. "I'm researching local history," I said, my gaze sweeping the tall, dusty shelves. Specifically around Raven's Peak Lodge. Her hand froze mid-stamp. The rhythmic thump-thump ceased. Slowly, deliberately, she looked up, her lips pressed into a thin, uninviting line. Her eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, seemed to hold a vast, unspoken knowledge. "Town records are in the back room." She pointed a gnarled finger toward a door with flaking green paint, almost camouflaged against the wall. "Newspapers are on microfilm, history sections on the left wall." I thanked her, trying to ignore the prickle of unease that had begun to settle over me, and headed toward the back room. The space was even more oppressive. A labyrinth of metal shelving units packed tight with cardboard boxes and bound volumes, their titles faded and unreadable in the dim light. A single microfilm reader sat on a small, cluttered desk in the corner, its pale blue light casting an eerie glow onto the wall. I started with the history books, pulling down anything that mentioned Blackwood Ridge or the surrounding mountains. Most were standard local histories. When the town was founded, who the first settlers were, how the logging industry had shaped the area. Nothing about strange occurrences, no whispers of things in the woods. It was as if the town's past had been meticulously sanitized, scrubbed clean of anything uncomfortable or anomalous. The microfilm proved more useful. I fumbled with the spools of local newspapers, starting with the most recent and working backward, the projector whirring softly as I scrolled through decades of mundane town council meetings, school events, and weather reports. At first, nothing jumped out. Then I hit 1972. 3 dead in mountain incident. The headline blared, stark and chilling against the faded newsprint. The article, however, was frustratingly vague. 3 maintenance workers at Raven's Peak Lodge were found deceased yesterday morning. Sheriff Robert Tanner cited multiple factors in the deaths and assured residents that the situation has been contained. The lodge will remain closed for 2 weeks during investigation. No names, no cause of death, no follow-up articles in the next issues. It was as if the tragedy had been swept under the rug, erased from public memory. I kept scrolling backward, the pattern emerging slowly, insidiously. Every few years, a brief, almost dismissive mention of someone gone missing. A hiker who never returned to his campsite. A hunter who went too deep into the woods. A teenager who took a dare to spend the night on the mountain. Some were found, their bodies often in a state that hinted at something far worse than a fall or an animal attack, their faces frozen in expressions of impossible terror. Many weren't. It was a litany of quiet disappearances, a slow, steady drain on the town's population, dismissed and forgotten. The librarian showed up behind me, her sudden presence making me jump, the stool scraping loudly on the floor. "We're closing in 5 minutes," she said, her eyes flicking pointedly to the screen, where a grainy image of a missing person flyer stared back at me. "Find what you needed." "Not exactly," I admitted, looking at the vague, unsatisfying reports. "These articles about the disappearances, they're pretty light on details." She took off her glasses, cleaning them meticulously with the bottom of her cardigan, her movements slow and deliberate. "Small town papers report what the town needs to know," she stated, her voice devoid of inflection. "And what about what really happened?" I pressed, a ripple of cold fear running down my spine, her eyes narrowed, piercing through my own. "You're Thomas Mitchell's nephew." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, my guard dropping instinctively. "I'm working at the lodge now. Then you should be careful what you go looking for." She reached past me, her hand bony and surprisingly strong, and switched off the microfilm reader. The pale blue light vanished, plunging the corner into deeper shadow. Some questions are better left unasked in Blackwood Ridge. I gathered my notes, a jumble of dates and vague observations, and headed out. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in deep purple shadows, the air growing colder with each passing minute. My shift didn't start for another 4 hours. I needed a drink. Not alcohol, I reminded myself, my sobriety a fragile shield against the creeping dread. Maybe some food. The Timberline line was the only bar in town, its neon beer signs casting garish streaks of red and blue across the dark, empty street. Inside, the place was half full, mostly men in work clothes, their faces weathered and drawn, drinking beers at small, rickety tables. Conversation stopped the moment I walked in, then started again, lower, more hushed. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a club soda with lime. The bartender, a burly man with a permanent scowl, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. E. Mitchell's nephew, a voice rumbled to my left. I turned to find a man in his 50s, his face a roadmap of deep lines, his hands rough and calloused from years of manual labor. He sipped a beer, 3 empty glasses pushed to the side, a clear indicator of his prolonged presence. Word travels fast, I said, trying for a lightness I didn't feel. Small town, he replied, a grim humor in his voice. He extended a hand. David Wilson. I worked with your uncle a few times, logging jobs. I shook his hand. Ryan Mitchell. Heard you took his job at the lodge. He studied me, his eyes sharp despite the empty glasses. 3 nights in, he took another pull from his beer. And what? Seen anything yet? The question hung between us, heavy and pointed. I thought about the screams, the footsteps on the roof, the shifting shadows at the tree line. The crushing, unnatural silence. Maybe, I said carefully, my voice low. David nodded, a knowing glint in his eye, as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected. He glanced around the bar, his gaze lingering on the other patrons, then slid onto the stool next to mine, his movements fluid despite his size. Your uncle and I talked sometimes when he'd come in here. David's voice dropped lower, a conspiratorial murmur. He asked questions, too, about the mountain, about the things people see up there. What kind of things? I asked, my blood chilling. David took a long, slow pull from his beer, his gaze distant, lost in memory. Been here all my life, my daddy too, and his daddy before him. Some things you just grow up knowing. Like what? Like staying on the paths. His voice was barely a whisper. Like not going into certain parts of the woods after dark. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale beer and something else, something metallic and cold. Like what happens to folks who break the rules. The bartender approached, wiping down the counter with a practiced motion. David straightened up, falling silent, his face blank, until the man moved on. Your uncle knew what was out there, David whispered once we were alone again, his voice barely audible above the low hum of conversation. We all do. Been here for generations. Some call it a beast. Others say it's something older than the mountains themselves, something that wears faces. He shivered, and it wasn't from the bar's AC. I don't call it anything. Don't talk about it at all, most times. Bad luck, then why are you talking to me? I pressed, leaning closer. He drained his beer and signaled for another, his eyes fixed on the empty glass. Because you're here now, because you took that job, and because your uncle was asking the same questions before he died. What happened to him? I asked again, my voice raw. Really? David accepted a fresh beer from the bartender, waiting until we were alone again. Official story as he fell hit his head. And the unofficial story, he met my gaze, his eyes weary, filled with a deep, ancient fear. He went looking for answers, found something else instead. David's fingers tapped nervously on his glass, a soft, frantic rhythm. Look, I shouldn't be saying this much. Town has ways of dealing with people who talk too much, ways of dealing with people who break the pact. Who should I talk to then? I insisted, a desperate urgency in my voice. Someone must know what's really going on. David hesitated, glancing toward the door like he was considering making a run for it. Finally, he sighed, a sound of profound resignation. Ask the old man who lives by Blackwater Creek, he said, his voice barely audible. Harold knows more than anyone. Cabins about 3 miles up the north road, where the creek bends under the big oak. Harold who? Jenkins. Harold Jenkins. David stood abruptly, pushing his stool back with a scraping sound. I've said too much already. Just be careful up there at night. Stay on the paths. Don't go investigating strange noises. Don't break the pact. He tossed a handful of bills on the bar and headed for the door. hunching his shoulders as if expecting a blow from an unseen hand. I finished my club soda, the ice clinking against the glass, and paid my tab. Outside, it was completely dark now. Stars, scattered like diamond dust, pierced through gaps in the clouds, and a sliver of a half-moon cast a faint, ghostly light on the empty street. My car was parked at the end of the block, a solitary island in the oppressive quiet. As I walked toward it, a sudden, unnatural cold settled over me, raising the hairs on my arms. Something felt off. Profoundly wrong, I stopped, listening. The town was dead quiet. No cars, no distant chatter, nobody walking around. Just the mournful hoot of an owl somewhere in the vast darkness and the rustle of leaves in a rising wind. Then I saw it. A huge shadow, impossibly fast for its size, streaked across the road ahead. It was gone in seconds, a fleeting, impossible blur, but I couldn't unsee it. Something massive, moving on 4 legs, but with a gait and a speed that didn't belong to any normal animal. Too fluid, too predatory, I grabbed my flashlight, thumbed it on, and swept its beam across the road, my hand trembling slightly. Nothing. No tracks, no lingering presence, nothing moving in the bushes on either side. But the air smelled different now, a cloying, unsettling scent, wet fur and pennies, animal and blood together. A primal scent that hit something deep in my ancient brain. I couldn't move, my feet rooted to the spot, the flashlight beam wavering. After a full minute of nothing, I forced myself to move, rushing to my car, fumbling with the lock and slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life on the first try, its headlights cutting twin swaths of light through the suffocating darkness. As I drove toward the cabin, the feeling wouldn't leave me. Whatever I'd seen crossing the road wasn't just passing through. It was watching, waiting. And I had a gut feeling it had been watching me ever since I'd arrived in Blackwood Ridge. I pulled my car onto the narrow dirt track where Blackwater Creek Road dissolved from cracked pavement to loose gravel. The trees crowded in from both sides, ancient sentinels reaching skeletal branches that scraped against my windows like grasping fingers. David's directions had been simple enough. Follow the north road until the big oak where the creek bends. But in these woods, every tree looked old and impossibly tall, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the deepening twilight. The road grew even narrower, forcing me to slow to a crawl, the car bouncing over unseen ruts. My headlights illuminated a wooden bridge spanning the creek, its planks gray and weathered, sagging precariously in the middle. Past it, barely visible through the thick undergrowth, sat a small cabin, its metal roof catching the last, fading light of the afternoon. I parked and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the soft, murmuring rush of the creek and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a woodpecker somewhere nearby. The cabin looked barely lived in, a forgotten relic of another time. A wisp of smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, and a neatly stacked pile of split wood leaned against one wall. The porch, its planks sagging noticeably in the middle, held a wooden rocking chair. In that chair sat a man, so still, so perfectly blended with the shadows, that I hadn't noticed him at first. He watched me, unmoving, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze unwavering. I got out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounding impossibly loud in the quiet. I approached the bridge. The old, worn boards groaned under my weight, each creak a protest against my intrusion. "You're Thomas's boy," the man said, his voice carrying clearly across the space between us, neither raised nor strained, but possessing a startling resonance. He spoke before I'd even reached the other side. I stopped halfway across, my hand instinctively going to the leather pouch Harold had given me. "I'm his nephew, Ryan Mitchell." The man nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Harold Jenkins," he said, his voice old and worn like the creek stones. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Come sit." I crossed the rest of the bridge, the boards complaining one last time, and climbed the 3 steps to the porch. Up close, Harold looked even older than I'd expected. His face was a roadmap of deep wrinkles, his skin like dried parchment, and his hair was a shock of pure white, thin and ethereal. But his eyes, though ancient, were startlingly bright, observing me with an unnerving intensity as he looked me over. "How did you know who I was?" I asked, lowering myself cautiously into the rocking chair, its wood groaning softly under my weight. "You look like him around the eyes," Harold said, his rocking resuming, a soft, hypnotic rhythm against the wooden planks. "And not many strangers come this way, not anymore. David Wilson told me I should talk to you." Harold's mouth twitched, a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "David talks too much when he drinks, always has." Gets loose with the old stories. He said you know things about the mountain. I know many things, Harold replied, his gaze drifting past me to the darkening forest. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing, transforming the familiar into something alien and ominous. Which ones are you after? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, my voice barely a whisper. I've been working at the lodge for 3 nights now. I've heard screams in the forest, footsteps on the roof, seen shadows moving between the trees. Harold's rocking slowed, almost imperceptibly, but didn't stop. His bright eyes fixed on me, knowing. You've been hearing it at night, haven't you? His tone wasn't surprised. It was a statement of fact, confirming a chilling suspicion. My stomach dropped. He already knew. What is it? I asked, my voice tight. Harold looked past me again, to the darkening forest, to the ancient, brooding mountains. The mountain has always had a keeper, he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Something old, something that was here long before the first settlers cut down trees to build their homes, something that was here before the trees themselves. A beast, I prompted, the word feeling too small, too mundane for the dread I felt. Harold shook his head slowly. That's what some call it. Names don't matter much to things that old, to things that don't have names. It is a presence, an entity. It exists on the edges of this world, always trying to bleed through. I thought about the indistinct shadows I'd seen, the unnatural movement at the tree line, the feeling of something watching. What does it want? Same as any living thing, Harold said, his eyes finally coming back to mine, sharp and piercing. Territory, sustenance. A connection, he paused, then continued, his voice taking on a lower, more serious tone. The town made a pact generations ago. We stay on marked paths, never hunt in certain areas. Leave offerings at stone markers deep in the woods. Offerings, like sacrifices. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Harold shook his head. Food mostly, sometimes tools or clothes, things it finds useful, things that keep it satisfied. And in return, his gaze hardened, fixing on me. In return, it takes only what it needs, what it deems suitable. The implications of that hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I thought about the missing hikers, the dead maintenance workers, the strange, unnatural silence in the forest at night. The cold that settled into my bones, my uncle's cryptic notes. My uncle, I said, the name a painful rasp. Thomas. What happened to him? Harold's rocking stopped completely, the sudden silence deafening. His eyes, ancient and knowing, seemed to bore into my very soul. Thomas broke the rules, got curious about what was behind that metal door. He dug too deep. He came down here, Ryan. My breath caught in my throat, the door in the basement, with the 3 locks. Harold nodded, his face grim, a profound weariness etched into his features. That door was part of the original pact. A boundary line, a seal, one of many. What's behind it? I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. Harold's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine fear in their depths. A way in, or perhaps a way out. For it, the sun was sinking fast, a dying ember behind the peaks. The clearing around us was plunging rapidly into deep shadow. Harold suddenly stood up, his movements surprisingly swift for a man of his age. You need to go, he said, his voice urgent, his gaze sweeping the darkening forest. It's not safe after dark. I stood too, not ready to leave, 1,000 questions still buzzing in my head. But I still don't understand. Understanding won't save you, Harold said, already disappearing into the cabin's shadowy interior. He returned moments later, carrying a small, worn leather pouch. He pressed it into my hand, his fingers surprisingly cold against mine. Keep this with you, stay on the path, never leave the lodge during your shift. The pact is fragile. You broke one of its rules, didn't you, when you left the path last night? It marked you then, it's testing you. The pouch was soft, worn smooth by years of handling. It felt heavy for its size, a dense, mysterious weight. What is it? I asked, clutching it. Protection of a sort, Harold said, already ushering me toward the steps, his urgency palpable. Go now, and don't come back here after sunset. I stumbled down the steps, the unspoken threat in his voice pushing me forward. At the bridge, I turned back, a final, desperate question bursting from me. My uncle's journal mentioned footprints, scratching, things getting closer. What was he talking about? Harold stood at the edge of his porch, half in shadow, a spectral figure against the deepening gloom. The beast tests boundaries, always has, but something's changed. It's getting bolder, more hungry. Why? I demanded. Because the pact is weakening, has been for years. Harold's face, etched in the last fading light, was deadly serious. Your uncle wasn't the first to break the rules, just the most recent. The pact is a cage, a prison, and when a keeper fails, it looks for another. I wanted to ask more, so much more, but the sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains. The forest around us was darkening rapidly, its shadows lengthening, deepening, turning predatory. "Go," Harold said one last time, his voice a low, guttural command. "And remember, Ryan, stay on the paths or you'll be trapped." Like me, I drove back too fast on the narrow road, looking in my rearview mirror more often than at the road ahead. The trees, thick and oppressive, seemed to crowd the road behind me, their shadows stretching, twisting, reaching. By the time I reached the relative safety of the paved road, my hands were clamped so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles ached back at the cabin. I locked the door and pulled the curtains tight, shutting out the oppressive darkness. I still had 3 hours before my shift at the lodge. I sat at the kitchen table, the leather pouch Harold had given me clutched in my hand. I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst a small bundle of dried, oddly fragrant herbs tied with twine, was something else. What looked like a tooth, yellowed with age, curved like a scythe, and far too big for any normal animal. It was as long as my thumb, with a jagged, wicked edge that glinted dully in the dim light of the cabin. I placed the tooth on the table, its sharp point casting a tiny, ominous shadow. Whatever it came from would have had a mouthful of these, something that ate meat, something that hunted. Something that existed beyond the realm of normal. My phone rang, making me jump, the sudden noise jarring in the quiet cabin. Emma's name flashed on the screen, a comforting beacon of normalcy in this rapidly unraveling world. "Hey," I answered, trying to force a casual note into my voice, but it came out tight, strained. "Ryan, you okay?" Her voice, bright and clear, sounded miles away. "You sound weird." "I'm fine," I lied, my gaze fixed on the brutal curve of the tooth on the table. "Just getting ready for work." "How's it going? The job working out?" I picked up the tooth, tracing its jagged edge with my thumb. "It's interesting. Interesting how? Just different than I expected." How could I tell her about the screams, the shifting shadows, the ancient beast and its terrifying pact? She'd think I was hallucinating, that sobriety had cracked something in my brain, that I was spiraling again. "How are things with you?" "Same old," I tried to redirect, to shift the conversation back to the mundane. "Yeah, same old. Listen, I was thinking of coming to visit next month, see this place you're settling into." "No," I said, too quickly, the word sharp and abrupt. "I mean not yet, let me get more established first. It's a lot to take in." Silence stretched on the line, thick with her unspoken concern. Then, "Ryan, are you sure you're okay? You don't sound like yourself." "Just tired," I forced out, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. "New job, new schedule. Night shifts are messing with my sleep." "If you say so," she said, her voice laced with unconcealed doubt. "Call me if you need anything, okay? Anytime. I will, promise." I ended the call, the silence in the cabin suddenly more profound, more crushing. I put the tooth and herbs back in the pouch, slipping it into my jacket pocket. I ate a quick dinner, the food tasteless in my mouth, my mind already racing, then headed to the lodge for my shift. George was waiting in the security office, his gaunt frame hunched over the previous night's logbook, his eyes scanning its pages with an unnerving intensity. He looked up the moment I entered, his gaze sharp, assessing. "You're early," he said, checking his watch. "Couldn't sleep." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Something on your mind?" I thought about telling him I'd spoken with Harold, about the old man's chilling revelations, but something in George's earlier warnings, his cold, dismissive attitude, made me hesitate. "Just getting used to the schedule," I mumbled, my lie feeling flimsy. George nodded, seemingly satisfied, returning his attention to the logbook. "Make your rounds on time tonight. We had some disturbances last night after you left." "What kind of disturbances?" My stomach clenched. "Nothing to worry about. Just keep to the paths and log anything unusual." He headed for the door, then paused, his hand on the frame, his voice dropping, almost a whisper. "And Mitchell, whatever you hear tonight, stay inside." The door clicked shut behind him before I could ask what he meant by disturbances, or why I should stay inside. I settled into the chair, the glow of the security monitors painting the empty hallways and darkened rooms in stark greens and grays. My hand kept going to the leather pouch in my pocket, my fingers tracing the outline of the grotesque tooth through the soft material at 10 o'clock. I made my first round. The lodge was quiet, the empty guest rooms locked and dark, their silence oppressive. In the basement, I checked the metal door with its 3 locks, all secured. By midnight, the usual unnatural silence had fallen outside. No crickets, no night birds, no rustling leaves, just dead air and the occasional creak of the lodge settling. The cold that had permeated the cabin now seemed to seep into the very stones of the lodge at 1217. It started. A low howl, far away at first, somewhere deep in the forest, rising in pitch until it seemed to fill the entire night, resonating in the very bones of the mountain. It wasn't a wolf, too deep, too sustained. It held for nearly 30 seconds before fading into an echo that lingered long after the sound itself had died. I checked the monitors. Nothing. Nothing moved on any screen. The howling came again at 1:05, closer this time. It sounded like it was coming from just beyond the tree line, a hungry, ancient sound. I made my rounds at 1:30, staying inside, as George had warned. Through the windows, I could see nothing but impenetrable darkness and the vague, spectral outlines of trees. At 2:22, during my rounds on the main floor, I heard scratching at the main entrance. 3 distinct scratches. A pause, then 3 more. The same unnerving pattern I'd heard at the cabin my first night. I walked toward the door slowly, my flashlight raised, its beam a weak shield against the encroaching dread. The scratching stopped. Then came a soft thump, like something heavy leaning against the wood. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, my hand instinctively closing around the leather pouch in my pocket, its contents a small comfort. After a full minute of suffocating silence, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. Nothing, just an inky, featureless darkness. I returned to the security office, my heart thumping against my ribs, and logged what I'd heard, my hand still trembling slightly. The rest of the night passed in a chilling, profound silence. No more howls, no more scratching. Just the pervasive feeling that something was out there, just beyond the glass, watching. Waiting. When George arrived at 7:55, I was already packed up to leave, my bag slung over my shoulder. "Anything to report?" he asked, his eyes scanning the logbook. He stopped at my entries, howling closer than before, scratching at the main entrance around 2:30 am. George's face remained impassive, but I noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the desk. "Did you go outside?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes fixed on my entries. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You said to stay in," he nodded, a barely perceptible easing of the tension in his shoulders. "Good, that's good." I hesitated, then decided to take the risk, a strange compulsion driving me to speak the truth. "I talked to Harold Jenkins yesterday." George's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert, a flicker of something raw and dangerous in their depths. "What did he tell you?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. "About the pact, the beast. What's behind the door?" His voice was carefully neutral, but his gaze was drilling into me. "He told me everything," I said, meeting his stare. "And you believe him?" "I believe something's out there," I stated, my voice firm. "Something that killed my uncle." George was silent for a long moment, studying my face, his own unreadable. Finally, he sighed, a sound of deep, profound weariness. "Harold knows things, yes, but he's not always reliable. Some of his stories get twisted with age. He seemed pretty clear to me," I countered, not convinced. "About a keeper, about it wearing faces. Just be careful what you take as truth around here, Mitchell." George picked up the logbook, his hand almost crushing its spine. "Some stories get twisted over time, twisted into something dangerous." I nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to push further, the chilling feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle solidifying in my gut. "See you tonight." The morning air felt clean, sharp, a welcome contrast to the stale, oppressive atmosphere of the lodge. I drove back to the cabin with the windows down, letting the crisp mountain air whip through the car, hoping it would clear my head. The forest in the golden light of dawn looked normal again, just trees and bushes, nothing weird, nothing threatening. But as I pulled up to the cabin, something on the front porch caught my eye. A small, dark shape. I killed the engine and got out, my boots crunching on the gravel. It was a dead rabbit, its small body still and lifeless, its neck broken with unnatural precision. Not torn up or bloody, not the work of a predator, just broken, and placed, deliberately, right in front of my door. I looked around. The clearing was empty. The forest quiet, filled only with the normal morning sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. But the chill I'd felt at the lodge, the sense of being watched, lingered. I picked up the rabbit by its back legs, its fur soft and cold against my fingers, and carried it to the edge of the woods. As I tossed it into the bushes, the chilling realization solidified. This was a message, a warning, or perhaps, most disturbingly, an offering. For me back inside, the silence of the cabin felt less comforting, more foreboding. I pulled out my uncle's leather journal. its cover old and smooth from years of handling. I'd found it this morning, hidden behind some old incident reports in the security office filing cabinet, not with his other personal effects. Someone had put it there on purpose. A silent, desperate message from the grave. The first entries were mundane, almost unremarkable. Weather notes, maintenance issues, quick mentions of wildlife he'd seen during his night rounds. March 3rd, quiet night, fixed loose railing on east staircase. Raccoon got into the dumpster again. March 7th, heavy rain, leaking lobby ceiling near fireplace. Left note for maintenance. But around mid-April, the writing changed. The neat, precise script began to waver, slanting across the page, growing more erratic, infused with a frantic energy. April 16th, heard something in the basement tonight, not pipes, not settling like whispers. Checked 3 times, nothing there, but I know it was there. April 22nd, footprints outside the east entrance, too big for a person. Not shaped right for a bear. George says I'm seeing things. He's lying, I know he is. I turned the page, forgetting about my coffee, which was growing cold beside me. The handwriting grew messier still, lines sometimes cutting deep into the paper, as if pressed with desperate force. May 3rd, they're watching me from the trees. I can see their eyes reflecting my flashlight. Not animals. They don't move right, they flow. May 10th, found scratches on the basement door. 3 sets, always 3. George says it's nothing. He's lying. I need to know what's behind that door. May 17th, it knows when I'm alone. It waits until I'm alone. It tries to get in. The final pages were a descent into madness, fragmented thoughts, sentences stopping halfway, others pushed so hard into the paper they almost broke through. May 30th, can't sleep. It's scratching at my windows at home now. 3 times, pause. 3 times it's trying to lure me out. June 2nd, Harold knows. He's always known. Says I need to stay on the paths. Too late for that. The paths are too small now. It's everywhere. The last entry was dated just 3 days before his death. June 5th. It's not what they say it is. Not a beast, something worse, something ancient. It wears faces. It knows things. It knows my thoughts. It preys on emptiness, on desperation. It knows me. I closed the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The security office, once mundane, now felt cramped, suffocating. The monitors displaying empty hallways, vacant rooms, the quiet forest beyond the lodge's walls, everything looked normal. Nothing was. My watch showed 1:47 a.m. time for another round. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, slipping the journal into my jacket pocket. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. The lodge creaked around me as I walked the main floor, the familiar noises of an old building settling. Nothing unusual in the lobby, nothing in the restaurant or meeting rooms. The basement was last, as always. I hated going down there, especially after reading the journal. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step taking me deeper into the oppressive chill. The bare bulbs cast pools of sickly yellow light that didn't quite reach the corners, leaving vast stretches of shadow. I was halfway down the long, echoing hallway when I saw them. Muddy footprints, coming from the utility entrance, leading straight to the metal door with its 3 locks. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam fixed on the tracks. They weren't human. Too large, misshapen, with what looked like distinct claw marks at the edges. Not bare tracks either. Nothing I knew. The trail ended at the door. The locks, when I checked them, were still secure. But the metal itself bore fresh scratches, deep and vicious. 3 parallel lines carved into the steel. I touched them, feeling the rough, raw edges. Something had tried to get in. Or out, my radio crackled, making me jump, the sudden noise shattering the oppressive silence. "Mitchell, you there?" George's voice, tight with tension. I keyed the mic. "Yeah, in the basement." A pause. "Then stay there." I waited, listening to the low hum of the heating system, the steady drip of unseen water, and the frantic thud of my own heart. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard the security door upstairs slam open and footsteps pounding down the concrete stairs, fast and heavy. George appeared at the end of the hallway, still buttoning his flannel shirt, his hair sticking up wildly on one side. He looked like he'd dressed in seconds, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen before. "What did you see?" he demanded, striding toward me, his voice a harsh whisper. I pointed at the footprints. "These weren't here during my midnight round." George stared at the tracks, his gaze then snapping to the freshly scratched door. His face went slack for a moment, the blood draining from it, before twisting into something between raw anger and stark terror. "You need to forget what you saw," he said, pushing past me, his movements jerky. He pulled open a supply closet, the smell of cleaning chemicals suddenly filling the air, and yanked out a mop and bucket. "What are you doing?" I asked, disbelief warring with a rising sense of dread. "Cleaning up." He filled the bucket at a utility sink, sloshing water onto his shoes in his haste. "Shouldn't we document this?" "Call someone." "No." The word came out sharp, like a slap. George began mopping the mud, erasing the prints with quick, aggressive strokes, his movements desperate, almost violent. "This isn't something we report. This isn't something we acknowledge." I pulled the journal from my pocket, its weight suddenly immense. "My uncle saw things too, wrote about them." George's hands froze on the mop handle. The water dripped unnoticed from the mop head onto the concrete floor. His head snapped up, his eyes burning into mine. "Where did you get that?" "Found it in the filing cabinet," I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "Someone hid it. Give it to me." He held out his hand, water dripping from his fingers onto the concrete floor, staining it a darker gray. I stepped back, keeping the journal clutched tightly. "It's my uncle's. It belongs to me now." George's jaw worked, a muscle twitching furiously in his cheek. "Your uncle couldn't let it go. He kept digging, and look what happened." "What did happen?" I demanded, the words a challenge. "Because I'm starting to think he didn't just fall." George resumed mopping, his movements jerky, agitated. "Some things are better left alone, Mitchell. This town has ways of dealing with problems. Has for generations." "Harold Jenkins told me about the pact," I said, throwing the words out like a gauntlet. The mop clattered to the floor, splashing dirty water onto George's trousers. His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might pass out. His eyes, wide and terrified, fixed on mine. "Stay away from him," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with a desperate urgency. "He's not right in the head." "He seemed pretty clear to me," I countered, pressing the advantage. "Told me about the beast, the offerings, the boundaries, the keepers, the things that break through." George picked up the mop, his hands shaking slightly, struggling to regain control. "Harold Jenkins is dangerous. He knows things, yes, but he's not what you think. What is he then? Just stay away from him." George finished cleaning the mud, scrubbing the concrete with more force than necessary, then wrung out the mop with a violent twist. "And stay on the paths, always on the paths." He gathered his cleaning supplies, his movements still agitated, and headed for the stairs, then paused, looking back at me. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something akin to pity there. "You're a lot like your uncle, Mitchell, curious, stubborn. He couldn't stop digging either, and it consumed him." "Is that why he died?" I pushed, desperate for the truth. George didn't answer. He simply turned and ascended the stairs, leaving me alone in the basement corridor, staring at the now clean floor and the newly scratched metal door. "Finish your shift, Mitchell. Lock up when you leave. And for God's sake, stay inside." After he left, I stood alone in the basement corridor, staring at the now clean floor and the scratched door. The journal felt heavy in my pocket, a silent testament to my uncle's final, terrifying days. I finished my rounds, the silence of the lodge more oppressive than ever, and returned to the security office. The rest of the night passed in an intense, watchful silence. I logged the incident in careful, neutral language. Mud tracked in from utility entrance, cleaned by manager. Scratches observed on metal door, manager notified. At 4:17 a.m. I heard it, a child crying outside. The sound was faint at first, just on the edge of hearing, a soft, hiccuping sob that might have been the wind playing tricks on my exhausted mind. But it came again, clearer this time, unmistakable, a child's cry. Small and desperate, I checked the monitors. The exterior cameras showed nothing but empty grounds and dark trees. The crying continued, rising and falling, a mournful, heart-wrenching sound of real distress. It tugged at something deep inside me, a primal need to protect, to help. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, hesitating at the main entrance door. George's warning came back to me, stay inside, but it was a child. A lost, frightened child. My past, all the mistakes, the selfishness, the inability to protect those I loved, screamed at me. This was a chance to do something good, to be someone better. I keyed my radio. "George, you there?" Static answered me. I tried again. "George, do you copy?" Nothing. The line was dead. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Twisting my gut, I made my decision, a fatal one. I unlocked the main entrance, the heavy bolt sliding back with a resonant thud, and stepped outside. The night air hit me like a wall, cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something cloying and sweet, like decaying flowers. My powerful flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty parking lot to the tree line beyond. There, at the very edge of the woods, stood a small figure, child-sized, standing perfectly still. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin and small in the vast, consuming silence. "Are you okay?" The crying stopped. Abruptly, the figure didn't move. I took a step forward, then another. "It's all right," I said, trying to infuse my voice with calm and reassurance. "I'm here to help." The figure backed away, melting between the trees, a ghost in the shadows. "Wait," I moved faster, a frantic urgency seizing me, following the small shape as it withdrew deeper into the ancient, whispering forest. My flashlight beam caught fleeting glimpses. A pale arm, the back of a small, unmoving head, tiny feet moving with impossible grace between fallen logs. I pushed through low-hanging branches, stumbling over unseen roots. The lodge lights, a distant, fading beacon of safety, grew smaller behind me. The child figure stayed just ahead, always visible, a tantalizing promise of rescue, but never quite reachable. "Please stop," I called out, my voice hoarse, my lungs burning. "I won't hurt you." The figure stopped in a small clearing, its back to me. Relief, sharp and potent, washed over me. I walked up, my legs trembling from the chase. "Hey there, are you lost? Let me help you get." I stopped mid-sentence. My flashlight beam, sweeping across the ground, showed no path beneath my feet. Just wild forest floor, untouched by human traffic. I'd left the path. A wave of nausea washed over me, cold and sickening. Harold's warning, George's insistence, "Stay on the paths." The crying stopped. Everything went quiet. A profound, crushing silence that made my ears feel stuffed, my own heart pounding like a drum against the sudden, aching void. Not even insects made a sound in the oppressive darkness. Slowly, impossibly, the small figure turned. And then, before I could fully comprehend its face, a low, guttural growl rumbled through the clearing. Not from the child shape, but from everywhere at once. From the trees, the ground, the very air itself. It vibrated in my chest, rattled my teeth. I backed away, my flashlight jumping wildly across the trees. Shadows moved between the trunks. Huge, liquid shapes that seemed to flow, to ooze instead of walk. More growls joined the first, making a circling chorus of sound around me, pressing in, suffocating. The child figure stood completely still now. My flashlight caught its face for just a moment. Blank, expressionless, with eyes that didn't reflect light but seemed to absorb it, to bounce it back, like obsidian mirrors. They were deep, empty pools that hinted at an ancient, consuming hunger. I turned and ran, blindly, smashing through bushes, branches lashing at my face, tearing at my skin. Behind me, the growling intensified, growing louder, closer. I could hear heavy, crushing movement in the forest, the snap of branches breaking under impossible weight. I saw the lodge lights through the trees, a distant promise of salvation, and pushed harder, my lungs burning, the taste of blood in my mouth. The building seemed impossibly far away. Something brushed my back. Not quite touching, but close enough to feel its heat, its predatory breath on my neck. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. The edge of the forest was just ahead. 3 more desperate strides, and I burst from the tree line, stumbling across the open ground toward the lodge entrance, gasping for air. I slammed into the heavy oak door, fumbling frantically with my keys, dropping them once before managing to jam the right one into the lock. As I pushed inside, I risked one quick, terrified look back. The forest wasn't moving. No sound, no motion, no sign of the child or whatever grotesque thing had chased me. But at the exact edge of the trees, where forest met cleared ground, stood Harold Jenkins. His silhouette was stark against the faint glow of the distant town lights. He raised one hand, a slow, deliberate gesture that might have been a farewell or a warning, or perhaps a chilling affirmation. Then he turned and walked into the darkness, vanishing between the trees as if he belonged there, as if he were simply a part of the oppressive, ancient landscape. I locked the door, my hands shaking so violently I had to try twice, then 3 times, until the deadbolt finally clicked into place. Back in the security office, I collapsed into the chair, breathing hard and fast, my body trembling uncontrollably. The monitors showed nothing unusual, just empty grounds, dark forest. As if nothing had happened, I pulled out my uncle's journal, its pages now feeling impossibly heavy, and opened it to the last entry, reading his final, chilling words again. June 5th. It's not what they say it is. Not a beast. Something worse, something ancient. It wears faces. It knows things. It preys on emptiness, on desperation. It knows me. Outside, the forest waited, and somewhere deep within it, something that could look like a child watched the lodge. With patient, hungry eyes. And I knew with a certainty that froze my blood that it wasn't just watching. It was waiting for me. And it was already inside. I dropped the rifle, its cold metal clattering against the concrete floor, a jarring sound in the sudden silence. The tunnel was right there, a gaping maw in the concrete wall where the heavy metal door, that ancient seal, had been locked for decades. The air pouring from it smelled wrong, damp and metallic, like old pennies left in stagnant rain. My flashlight beam pierced the gloom, illuminating the first few yards of rocky passage before the darkness swallowed the light hole. Footprints marked the dirt floor, the same odd, clawed prints I'd seen leading to the door earlier. But these went in, not out. I keyed my radio. "George, the basement door is open." Static answered me, a harsh hiss of nothingness. "George, do you copy?" Still nothing. The smart move would be to back away. To lock up the lodge, get in my car and run. To forget everything. But the image of that child figure at the tree line, its blank, mirrored eyes, the chilling whisper of Harold's voice, it's already inside you. "That's how you ended up in the woods this morning," flashed through my mind. Whatever had lured me into the woods last night, whatever had stalked me, it was connected to this tunnel. And maybe, just maybe, to my uncle's death. This was the truth. The dark heart of Blackwood Ridge. I checked the rifle. Loaded, safety off. My uncle had taught me to shoot when I was 12, out on his remote farm, lessons long forgotten. I hadn't held a gun since getting sober, since putting that destructive part of my life behind me. The weight of it felt both alien and unnervingly familiar in my hands. A new kind of sobriety. I stepped into the tunnel. The darkness surrounded me completely, thick and oppressive, pressing in from all sides. My flashlight seemed to dim the farther I went, its beam barely cutting through the heavy air. The passage sloped downward, a gentle, insidious descent, curving subtly to the right. The walls changed from poured concrete to rough, jagged stone, as if the builders had started with modern materials, but given up or been prevented from digging deeper. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each splash echoing back to me, amplified by the close confines. The temperature dropped with every step, the air growing colder, until my breath fogged visibly in front of my face. A ghostly white cloud. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like nails on stone, a low, deliberate drag. I froze, my heart thundering against my ribs, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. It came again farther ahead, then silence. "Hello," my voice sounded flat, absorbed by the stone around me, swallowed by the profound darkness. No answer. Just the steady, unnerving drip of water, a tormenting rhythm. I continued forward, rifle raised now, my senses on high alert. The tunnel got a bit wider, the ceiling higher, until my light couldn't reach it, lost in the echoing blackness above. The air felt heavier here, thick and cloying, making it harder to breathe, as if the very space was alive, holding its breath. The memory of waking up in the woods that morning came back to me, sharp and vivid, dirt under my fingernails, leaves in my hair. No idea how I'd gotten there. The last thing I remembered was running, pure, animal terror from whatever had chased me in the forest. Seeing Harold at the tree line, then locking myself in the lodge. The next thing I knew, I was lying face down in the dirt, half a mile from the lodge, as dawn broke through the trees. George and the others had been waiting when I stumbled back, their trucks parked in a grim half-circle at the entrance. Their faces had been stark, accusing. "You left the path," George had said, his voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "We can't protect you now, you're marked." I tried to explain about the child, the crying, how I'd only been trying to help. They'd exchanged looks, knowing, understanding looks I couldn't read. "There are no children at the lodge," George had stated, his voice chillingly absolute. "Never have been." I pushed the memory away, forcing my mind back to the present, focusing on the tunnel ahead. The passage got wider still, opening into what felt like an enormous, cavernous space. My flashlight couldn't reach far enough to see walls or ceiling. The darkness was too vast, too consuming. I stepped forward and my boot hit something solid. I aimed my flashlight down a stone marker. It stood at my feet, waist-high, crudely carved from dark, ancient rock. Strange symbols, unlike anything I'd ever seen, covered its surface. Spirals, jagged lines, shapes that might have been eyes or mouths, or something far more ancient and terrible. The stone was dark with age, and something that looked sickeningly like dried, encrusted blood. I moved my light around, my breath catching in my throat. More markers. They formed a rough circle, their crude shapes almost invisible against the vast darkness. In the middle of that circle, a figure stood, Harold, I whispered, my voice cracking on the name, barely audible above the steady drip of water. He stood with his back to me, head bowed, as if in prayer or deep concentration. He didn't turn at my voice. I tried to warn you, he said, his voice oddly flat, resonant, yet lacking the weariness I remembered. The beast has chosen you, as its new keeper. What are you talking about? I clutched the rifle tighter, bringing it up, something in his posture and the unnatural stillness of the air, setting off alarms in my head. The pact is broken, Harold continued, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep, shuddering breath. You broke it when you left the path, when you stepped into its embrace. Now someone has to take my place, your place. Harold turned slowly, and his face was wrong, terribly wrong. Skin stretched too tight across the bones, pulled taut, almost translucent. His eyes were not the bright, ancient eyes I remembered, but black. Black from corner to corner, like bottomless pits. When he smiled, his mouth opened too wide, too far, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, like a predator's. I've been the keeper for so long, he said, his voice distorting, wavering, multiple voices layered upon one another, a chorus of ancient, weary suffering. Holding it back, feeding it just enough to keep it satisfied. But I'm tired, Ryan, so tired. I raised the rifle, pointing it directly at his chest, the barrel trembling in my grip. What are you? I'm Harold Jenkins, the thing wearing Harold's face said, taking a deliberate step toward me. Its movements were stiff, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I'm what's left of him, what remained after the pact was made. 100 years ago, I made the pact to save this town, bound myself to the beast to keep it contained. Another step I backed up, keeping the distance between us, my back hitting cold stone. The air grew frigid, a chilling, palpable presence. Stay back, you don't understand yet. Harold's face twisted in what might have been sadness, a grotesque mimicry of human emotion. But you will, the beast has marked you. It wants you now, it's already inside you. That's how you ended up in the woods this morning. It's testing you, seeing if you'll fit. Fit for what? My voice was barely a choked whisper, to be its new keeper. Harold spread his arms wide, a gesture of profound, weary invitation. To take my place. I saw movement behind him, something vast and dark, stirring in the impenetrable blackness beyond my flashlight's reach. Something immense, something wrong. What happens if I refuse? Harold's too-wide smile returned, splitting his face. Then the beast takes the town, all of it, every soul. The pact will be broken completely, unleashed, free. My finger tightened on the trigger, a cold, hard resolve settling in my gut. And if I kill you, then you've removed the last barrier holding it back, Harold said, taking another step forward, his black eyes fixed on mine. I am the lock on its cage, Ryan. Kill me, and you set it free. And you become its new lock, its new cage. The movement behind him grew, a huge, indistinct shadow rising from the cavern floor, a formless, impossible shape that hurt my eyes to look at, its presence an unbearable pressure on the air. I had seconds to decide. Harold kept coming, his face changing, features melting and reshaping into something that no longer looked human with each step I fired. The shot was deafening, the crack echoing like thunder in the enclosed space, a blinding flash of light. Harold stumbled backward, a dark, spreading stain blooming across his chest. He looked down at the wound, his expression one of faint surprise, then a dawning horror. "You fool," he gasped, dropping to his knees, his voice ragged, multi-layered. I was the only thing keeping it contained. I moved up carefully, rifle still raised, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Harold fell onto his back, blood forming a dark, expanding puddle beneath him. "The beast isn't what you think," he wheezed, grabbing my ankle with surprising strength, his black eyes, now clouded with pain, locking on mine. "It's been hiding. As the girl you saw, it's been waiting. And now there's nothing stopping it. Nothing to hold it back." His grip loosened. I watched, horrified, as his body began to age rapidly, grotesquely. His skin wrinkled, turning to parchment. His hair, already white, thinned and vanished. His flesh sank against bone, his features collapsing inward. His black eyes turned milky white, then clouded over completely, like ancient, forgotten stones. The ground began to shake, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the cavern. Dust and small rocks rained down from the unseen ceiling. The shadow behind Harold's rapidly decaying body grew, swelling, filling the chamber, becoming immense, formless, hungry. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer, stretching out into an endless, twisting labyrinth, bending in ways I didn't remember. The shaking got worse, violent tremors that sent cracks spiderwebbing across the stone walls around me. I tripped twice, catching myself on the rough, unforgiving rock, scrambling forward, driven by pure terror. Behind me, something howled. A sound too big for the tunnel, too vast for the mountain itself, a roar of ancient, unbridled fury and boundless hunger. It chased me upward, pushing at my back, a palpable, malevolent presence. I burst through the metal door into the basement corridor, gasping for breath. The lights were flickering wildly, the building groaning, creaking, shuddering around me as if in the throes of a massive earthquake. I sprinted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my legs burning. The main floor was a mess. Furniture knocked over, decorative vases shattered, windows cracked, some splintered inward. I didn't stop, didn't hesitate to grab anything from the security office. I ran for the entrance, bursting out into the night outside. The world was chaos. A cacophony of noise and frantic movement. Car engines revved, tires squealed, people shouted, their voices thin and desperate. Headlights cut through the darkness as vehicles, packed with terrified families, pulled away from homes, streaming toward the main road. The town was leaving. Evacuating, I ran to my car, fumbled with the lock, threw the rifle into the back seat, and sped out of the parking lot, tires spitting gravel. The road into town was packed, a desperate, slow-moving river of cars and trucks, all heading in the opposite direction, away from Blackwood Ridge. Main Street was a nightmare. People loaded vehicles with whatever they could carry, their faces pale with terror. Children cried, their screams adding to the rising panic. A fire had started in one of the storefronts, orange flames licking greedily at the night sky. I spotted David Wilson, his face grim and ashen, frantically directing traffic at an intersection, waving cars through with desperate urgency. I pulled over, slamming on the brakes, and jumped out. "What's happening?" I shouted over the noise, the roar of engines and panicked screams. David looked at me, his eyes wide, horrified. "You killed him, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. His voice was raw with accusation. Harold was our protection. He made the original pact 100 years ago. He was the lock, now it's free, and it's coming. I didn't know, I yelled, the words caught in my throat. I didn't know what I was doing. Doesn't matter now, David screamed, pointing down the road, his hand trembling. "Get out while you can. It's coming for everything." I scrambled back into my car and followed the stream of vehicles heading out of town. We made it perhaps 3 miles before hitting a roadblock. A massive pine tree, impossibly thick, had fallen across the highway, blocking both lanes, not snapped by wind, pushed forcefully. I turned around, trying another route, the desperate convoy of cars following. Same story. A washout had taken out the bridge over Blackwater Creek. The sudden, violent storm that had blown in was flooding low-lying areas, cutting off every escape route. The mountain had sealed us in. After the third blocked road, a desperate, trapped animal, I gave up and headed back to my uncle's cabin. The town was half empty now, a ghost town in the making. Those who couldn't get out were either locking themselves in their homes, their lights flickering erratically, or gathering at the church, whose steeple glowed with a desperate, defiant light in the darkness, a last bastion of flickering hope. I pulled up to the cabin and sat in the car, engine idling, the soft hum of false comfort. The rifle lay on the back seat, useless now. I'd killed Harold, thinking I was protecting myself, thinking I was killing the beast's servant. Instead, I'd broken the last seal, holding back whatever ancient, hungry thing lived under the mountain. My phone rang, making me jump. Emma's name flashed on the screen. My sister, my last tether to normalcy. I answered, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Ryan, I've been trying to reach you for hours." Her voice was tight with worry, raw with fear. "I'm okay," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Just been busy. You don't sound okay." "What's going on?" I watched lightning flash over the mountains, illuminating the brooding peaks, the storm growing worse, mirroring the chaos inside me. "Nothing. Everything's fine." "Ryan, please talk to me." "I'm worried about you." I closed my eyes, leaning my head against the steering wheel, the cool plastic a small comfort. "I think I made a mistake coming here, Em." "Then come home." Her voice was a desperate plea. "Just get in your car and drive. I'll meet you halfway. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I killed a man tonight," I confessed, the words tumbling out, raw and painful. "Because I set something free that should have stayed locked away. Because every road out of town is blocked. I need to figure some things out first," I said instead, trying to rein myself in to protect her from the madness. "Ryan, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you." "I'm fine." "Really?" I forced a steadiness into my voice I didn't feel. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Promise." "Promise." Her voice was laced with doubt. "Promise." I ended the call, the dial tone a mournful sound in the darkening cabin. I got out of the car. The wind had picked up, roaring through the clearing, bending the ancient pines at the edge of the forest, making them sway and creak like tormented giants. I unlocked the cabin door, the familiar click echoing unnaturally loud, and stepped inside, locking it behind me. The cabin felt different now, tiny, vulnerable, a flimsy shell against the encroaching darkness. I checked all the windows, drawing the curtains tight, shutting out the storm, shutting out the mountain. I brought in the rifle, its weight a cold reassurance, and loaded a fresh round into the chamber dot from my window. Through a small gap in the curtains, I could see movement in the forest. Trees swaying, not just from the wind, but as if something massive was pushing through them, moving with relentless purpose. Even though it was summer, the air inside the cabin turned so cold I could see my breath, ghostly white puffs against the dim light. I sat at the kitchen table, rifle across my lap, its cold metal a heavy weight, and waited for whatever was coming. For the thing I had unleashed, the wind howled outside, a ravenous sound, shaking the windows, rattling the very foundations of the cabin. I checked my watch, just past midnight. The storm had come in fast, far too strong, an unnatural tempest born of the mountain's fury. I tried the radio again, a desperate hope, nothing but static. The TV, a blank screen of snow. My phone had one bar, flickering in and out, a fragile thread to the outside whirled through a crack in the curtains. I saw the last few cars in town, headlights cutting through the driving rain, converging on the church. Their lights showed the empty, ravaged streets for a second before going dark again. People who couldn't get out, huddling together, maybe for safety, or maybe nobody wanted to die alone. I stayed put. Whatever was out there had been watching me since I arrived. It knew where I was. Running wouldn't help. Not now. A crash from outside, deafeningly loud, made me run to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. A massive pine tree, impossibly thick, had fallen across the road, snapped clean through its base. Not from lightning, something had pushed it over. The trees at the edge of the forest moved the wrong way, their thick trunks swaying as if pushed aside by something enormous moving between them, not just wind. I backed away from the window, gripping the rifle tighter, my knuckles white. The cabin felt thin, fragile, like it couldn't possibly keep out what was outside. My breath came out in foggy puffs. The temperature had plummeted at least 20 degrees in the last hour, defying the summer night. I could see frost forming on the inside of the windows. It was July. I needed to think, to figure out what I was dealing with. Harold had told me the beast wasn't what I thought. It wore faces. It preyed on emptiness, on desperation. It had been hiding as the girl I saw in the woods. And my uncle must have learned something. He'd been here longer. Had time to look around. I'd searched the cabin when I first got here, but only found hidden bottles. Thomas was careful, though. If he found something important, something crucial, he wouldn't leave it out, not where it could be easily found. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn bottom of the kitchen table, checking for taped packets, hidden notes. Nothing. I checked behind the drawers, under the mattress, behind the bathroom mirror. Still nothing. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I walked to the bedroom, the chilling cold seeping into every corner of the cabin. I stopped to listen. One board near the bed sounded different, hollow. I knelt down, pressing on it. The board moved slightly. I got my fingers into the edge and pulled. The board came up easily, revealing a small, dark space underneath. A manila envelope, sealed with old, yellowed tape, rested in the dust. I grabbed it and went back to the kitchen table, placing the rifle within easy reach. Inside the envelope was a jumble of papers, handwritten notes in my uncle's familiar, looping script, old newspaper clippings, and rough, frantic drawings. I spread them out on the table, using my flashlight to see better as the cabin lights flickered, and dimmed. The top sheet was dated 3 weeks before Thomas died. It's not a beast, not in the way we understand. It exists between places, our world and somewhere else. The door in the basement is an anchor point, a way for it to reach through. Harold knows more than he's saying. He's connected to it somehow. Bound to it, the keeper. The next page had a detailed drawing of the stone markers I'd seen in the underground chamber, with meticulous notes about their precise locations and the strange symbols carved into them. The symbols form a binding circle, old magic, the kind that requires blood to work, Harold's blood or someone else's. The pact is a sacrifice, a constant bleed. I went through more pages, Thomas's frantic research laid bare. He had been working tirelessly in his final weeks, piecing together the hidden history of Blackwood Ridge and the monstrous thing that lived under the mountain. 1923, first documented pact with the beast. 7 people disappeared that year, Town records show Harold Jenkins arrived the same year. Coincidence, 1972. 3 maintenance workers found dead at the lodge. All 3 had been checking out noises in the basement. All 3 had broken the rules about staying on paths. They got too close. 1998. Lodge closed for 6 months after structural damage, reopened with new basement door and 3 locks. George Campbell became manager the same year. George knows. The next page made my stomach clench, a cold dread blossoming in my chest. It feeds on fear, on desperation, on the kind of emptiness that drives people to places like Blackwood Ridge in the first place. People like me, people with nowhere else to go, people who are running. I thought about why I came here. 6 months sober, running from a life I'd wrecked, hoping to start over. The same desperation my uncle had felt, the same emptiness. It was the perfect lure, the perfect host. The final page was dated just 2 days before Thomas died. The handwriting was almost illegible, pushed so hard into the paper it had torn through in places. I know how to end this. The beast is tied to the door, to the stone markers, to Harold. Break one link in the chain and the whole thing falls apart. I'm going down there tonight. If I don't come back, burn everything. The cabin, the lodge, all of it. Fire is the only thing it fears, the only way to cut the root. I put the papers down, my hands shaking. Thomas had gone down to the chamber just like I had, but unlike me, he hadn't killed Harold. Something else had happened. Something had gone wrong. A sound from outside brought me back to the present, a soft thump on the porch steps, then another. Someone walking, taking their time. I grabbed the rifle, my heart hammering, and moved to the door, staying to the side of the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The footsteps stopped at the door, silence. Then 3 soft scratches on the wood. I held my breath, waiting. 3 more scratches, then a voice. "Ryan, are you in there?" Emma's voice, my sister's voice, but that was impossible. Emma was states away. I had just spoken to her on the phone. This couldn't be real. "Ryan, please. I drove all night to get here. Let me in." Her voice, so familiar, so loving, was laced with a desperate urgency that twisted my gut. I moved to the peephole, compelled despite my terror, and looked out. Emma stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with worry. She looked exactly like my sister. The same worried expression she always wore when dealing with me. The same way of hugging herself against the cold, the same small, familiar mole above her lip. "I was so worried after our call," she said, looking directly at the peephole, as if she could see me, as if she knew I was there. "You didn't sound right. I had to come." I backed away from the door, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. Even if Emma had left immediately after our call, she couldn't have made it here this fast. And how would she have gotten through the blocked roads, through the storm, through the thing outside? "Let me in, Ryan." The voice wasn't Emma's now. It was distorted, layered. Multiple voices speaking at once, a horrifying symphony of whispers and growls. The scratching returned, harder now, more aggressive. 3 scratches, pause, 3 more. "Ryan, please, it's cold out here." I backed further into the cabin, my mind racing, desperately trying to cling to the fragments of Harold's warnings, my uncle's notes. The beast wears faces. It knows what you fear, what you want, what you'll follow into the dark. It preys on emptiness, my desperate desire to have Emma here, to go back to a time when things were simple. Clean the scratching became pounding, violent blows that shook the whole door in its frame, splintering the wood around the hinges. The windows rattled, the glass groaning. Something heavy slammed against the side of the cabin, making the entire structure groan in protest. "Let me in, Ryan." The voice wasn't Emma's anymore. It was deeper, guttural, a monstrous chorus of predatory voices. I needed a plan. The beast wanted in. It wanted me. Harold had said it had chosen me as its new keeper. My uncle's final note kept playing over and over in my head. Fire is the only thing it fears, the only way to cut the root. I looked around the cabin, my eyes frantic. There was a gas can in the corner by the back door, for the generator, I assumed, and under the kitchen sink I found what I was looking for, a bottle of lighter fluid for the grill. The pounding at the door grew more intense, wood splintering, giving way. It wouldn't hold much longer. I worked quickly, my hands moving with desperate precision, ignoring the raw terror in my gut. I poured gasoline along the walls, over the threadbare furniture, across the wooden floor. The fumes made my eyes water, stung my nose, but I kept going until the can was empty. Then I added the lighter fluid, making sure to create a continuous path from the back door to the front, a liquid fuse. As I worked, I kept my phone in my pocket. When I finished, I took it out and typed a quick email to Emma, my real sister, not the monstrous thing outside pretending to be her. I explained everything: the beast, the pact, what I'd learned from Harold and my uncle's notes. I told her I loved her, and that I was sorry for all the worry I'd caused her over the years. I hit send, just as the front door gave way with a final, splintering crash of wood. The thing that stepped through the doorway wore Emma's face. But the resemblance ended there. Its body was wrong, too tall, too thin, joints bending in impossible, grotesque ways. Its skin stretched and moved as if something vast and writhing underneath was trying desperately to get out. It flowed liquid and unnatural. "Ryan," it said, Emma's voice coming from a mouth that smiled too widely, too hungrily, a parody of human affection. "I've been waiting for you." I backed toward the kitchen, keeping the table between us, my hands tightening on the rifle. "What do you want from me?" The same thing I wanted from Harold, the same thing I've wanted for 100 years. It took another step inside, its movements jerky and unnatural, a monstrous puppet. A keeper, a vessel, someone to hold me. So I don't have to go back to the dark, so I can bleed through, so I can be free. And if I refuse, then I take the town. Its smile widened further, splitting Emma's face in a way that made my stomach churn, revealing a maw of too many teeth, too many shadows. All of it, every soul that couldn't escape, starting with you. It lunged forward with impossible speed, clearing the table in a single, fluid bound. I stumbled back, digging frantically in my pocket for the matches I'd grabbed from the drawer. Its hand, no longer Emma's hand, but something with too many joints and long, bent fingers, grabbed my shirt, pulling me close. Its face changed, features melting and reshaping, coalescing into something new, something terrifyingly familiar. It was my uncle, Thomas, his face etched with fear and desperation, but twisted with a terrible, malevolent hunger. "Thomas wasn't strong enough," it rasped in my uncle's voice, a chorus of despair. "But you can end this, Ryan, just like he tried to, you can be the next vessel." I struck the match. The small flame blossomed, a tiny beacon of defiance in the monstrous darkness. And dropped it, the gas ignited with a terrifying whoosh, a roar of hungry flames racing along the path I'd created. The thing wearing my uncle's face screamed, a sound no human throat could make, a sound of ancient, raw anguish and fury. It released me, its impossible hand retracting. I scrambled toward the back door as fire climbed the walls, licking across the ceiling, the heat pressing against my back, searing my skin. The beast howled behind me, its body changing and twisting, writhing as flames engulfed it. The cabin groaned, support beams beginning to give way, the roar of the fire filling the world. I had one chance, one moment to decide. I could run, escape through the back door, leave the beast trapped in the burning cabin, consumed by the flames. Or I could stay, make sure it couldn't escape, even if it meant going down with it. Thomas had tried to end this. Harold had contained it for decades, a living prison. Now it was my turn. I turned back toward the beast. It writhed in the flames, its body changing rapidly, grotesquely, shifting between faces. I recognized Emma, Thomas, Harold, the child from the woods, even my own face, twisted in pain and rage. It wore them all, a monstrous, living tapestry of stolen identities. "It ends with me," I said, my voice raw, broken, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the beast or to myself, or to the suffocating darkness of the mountain itself. The roof started to cave in, burning wood falling down around us, showering us in sparks. The beast screamed with a rage so loud it shook the mountains, a sound that drowned out even the roaring fire, that echoed in the very core of my being. Smoke got in my lungs, choking me. The heat burned my skin, searing me alive. I didn't move, couldn't move. As the cabin burned around us, I watched the beast's stolen faces melt off, one by one, like wax, revealing something underneath. Something ancient, vast, terrifyingly hungry, and scared. Before the smoke made me blind, before the heat consumed me, I saw its real eyes. Not Harold's, not Emma's, too many to count. Tiny, shiny black, like obsidian shards, reflecting our fire, reflecting me as it burned us both up. The roaring flames consumed my body, but the entity, an ancient, parasitic consciousness, was already spreading, taking hold. My vision blurred, the faces flickered, but the chilling truth became clear. The mountain had found its new keeper, and it was me. My own eyes, now too many, reflected the horror, the hunger, the ancient, inescapable pact. What chilling twist left you speechless? Tell us in the comments.